There is a particular kind of quiet that settles over a man when he has everything the world thought would make him happy, and still the thing he longs for most is a voice on the other end of a phone line. A familiar voice. A child's voice. Marlon Brando built one of the most remarkable lives in the history of American cinema. He changed the way actors carried themselves on screen. He rewrote what it meant to be present, to be raw, to be real in front of a camera. Directors sought him. Studios needed him. Critics wrote about him in words usually reserved for painters and poets. But there was a version of Marlon Brando that almost no one ever wrote about. The one who sat alone on a small island in the South Pacific, in a house he had built far from the noise of Los Angeles and New York, and looked out at the water and thought about his children. He had 3 children by different relationships, Christian, Miko, and Cheyenne, and several others he acknowledged later in life. But the relationship he had with them, especially through their growing years, was fractured in ways that are hard to describe simply. He was absent, not always physically, but in the way that matters most, emotionally. He was consumed by his work, by his causes, by his restless intellect, by his grief, by his own complicated inner world. He had grown up a father who was cold and distant, a mother whose love was real but erratic, shadowed by her own struggles. Marlon had learned, early and without choosing to, what it felt like to reach toward a parent and find only air. And yet, somehow, he had passed some version of that distance on. He knew it. In his later years, he spoke about it with unusual candor, not in interviews designed to repair his image, but in private conversations, in the long silences of Tetiaroa, the small island paradise he had purchased years before, and where he eventually retreated from the world. He knew the cost. He felt it in his body. There is a particular afternoon, those who knew him then have described it in different ways, when Marlon sat in the shade of a tree on that island, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold, looking out at the lagoon. His children were adults by then. Some were struggling. Some were distant in their own right. One would be gone from this world far too soon. He sat with all of that. Not the applause, not the Oscars, not the famous faces of characters he had inhabited, Don Corleone, Terry Malloy, Colonel Kurtz. He sat with the simple and unmovable fact that the years he had spent reaching toward the camera had been years he had not spent reaching toward them. And now they were grown, and the distance between them had become its own kind of geography, real and wide, and crossed only with great effort. He had tried. In his later years, he genuinely tried. He called. He wrote. He asked questions he had not thought to ask when they were small. He attempted, imperfectly, clumsily, in the way that men of his generation often did, to say, "I see you now. I am sorry I did not look more carefully before. I am here if you will have me." It was not a grand gesture. It was not a speech from one of his films. It was just a man, old now, heavy, no longer the magnetic presence that had stopped rooms, reaching out a hand and hoping something would reach back. Sometimes it did. Sometimes a call was returned. Sometimes there was a visit, a meal, a few hours of ordinary time that felt to him like something close to precious. And sometimes the silence on the other end of the line was its own answer. He did not pretend the reconciliation was complete. He was too honest for that, and he had lived too long with the consequences of his own choices to dress them up in something tidy. But he held on to the moments that did come, the ones where the distance narrowed, even briefly, and he kept them close. Because he understood, perhaps better in those final years than at any other point in his life, that the greatest performance he had ever been asked to give had nothing to do with a camera. It was the daily, quiet, imperfect act of being present for the people who needed him. And he had spent too much of his life rehearsing for the wrong stage. Maybe you have felt something like this too. Not the fame, not the island, but the feeling of looking back across years and noticing the gaps. The conversations that kept getting postponed. The calls you meant to make. The moments you were physically present, but somehow not really there. If you are watching this tonight, maybe there is someone in your life, a child, a sibling, a friend, a parent still living, with whom there is some distance. Not from cruelty, not from carelessness in the usual sense, just from the way life arranges itself, from busyness, from pride, from the quiet assumption that there will always be more time. Marlon Brando had more time than most people get. He lived into his 80s. And still, there were things he wished he had said sooner. Still, there were moments he would have traded the applause for an ordinary Tuesday afternoon with a child who needed him. The gap between you and someone you love is not a wall. It rarely is. It is more like a door that has been closed for a long time. Not locked exactly, but closed from both sides, and neither person quite willing to be the first to reach for the handle. What if you were the one to reach first? Not with a perfect speech. Not with a resolution to everything that went unspoken. Just reach. A message. A call. A handwritten note, if that is easier. Something that says, "I'm thinking of you. I have not forgotten you. I am here." It does not have to be eloquent. Marlon Brando, a man famous for his command of language, for the way a single word from him could silence a room, reached out in ways that were stumbling and uncertain and very human. And those imperfect reaches mattered more than any polished performance ever could have. Because the people who love us are not waiting for a performance. They are waiting for us to show up. Simply, honestly, as we actually are. There is something else worth sitting with. Marlon Brando spent a great deal of his life believing that the most important thing he could give was his talent, his craft, his output, the work that would outlast him. And he was not wrong about the work. It has outlasted him. People still watch those films. People still study that presence. But in the quietest part of himself, in those long afternoons on that island, he knew the truth that most of us know when we are honest with ourselves. that no accomplishment, however real, however celebrated, fills the space left by the people we did not fully love while we had the chance. That is not a cause for despair. It is simply a reminder, a gentle one. Because if you are watching this, you still have time. Not infinite time, none of us do, but time. Enough time to make a call you have been putting off. Enough time to say the thing you have been carrying quietly. Enough time to show up, even awkwardly, even late, and mean it. The people in your life are not keeping score of how perfectly you showed up. Most of them are just hoping you will show up at all. Most of them would trade the memory of a dozen polished moments for one honest, imperfect afternoon with you as you actually are. Marlon Brando understood this, finally and completely, in the quietest chapter of his life. He sat on that island with his regrets and his hopes and his cold cup of tea, and he decided that the distance, however wide, was still worth crossing. And so he reached. Imperfectly. Late. But he reached. Maybe tonight, before you sleep, you let yourself think of one person, just one, toward whom you could reach a little. Not to fix everything, not to resolve what years have built up between you. Just to say, I am thinking of you. I have not stopped. You matter to me. That is enough to begin with. That has always been enough to begin with. Take a slow breath. Let that sit for a moment. And when you are ready, you will know what to do. There will always be a version of us that wished we had reached sooner. But the only moment we can reach from is the one we are in. And this one, right now, is not too late.